All right, so hello everyone. If you're here, please turn on your cameras. We're about to start. Very cute. Okay, so I hope you're adjusting well to the time changes and the daylight saving time or lack thereof. So yeah, a new time, a new start, a new week. So, but we're actually continuing from a previous topic for this class. So we left last time. I was talking about how to conduct an interview. Remember, we're talking about interviewing for this week and for last week and this week. And so we said when we the last thing we mentioned was about how you ask questions. And so in interviews, uh, sometimes the word why could sound like as if you're questioning the credibility of someone, or like as if you're questioning their motive. And so sometimes it's better to, why is a good question, but sometimes it's better to ask it in different ways, such as what's for or what's unique about it. So someone tells you they switch to, let's say, to buy Nike brand shoes, or they stopped buying Nike and started trying a New Balance something. You can ask, okay, so you want to ask why, but they could answer because I like it. But then you ask for what? So you could ask something more specific. So what do you like about it? What about the old brand? Like what happened? What made you think to switch? How is it different? Those type of things. So you can ask a question elaboratively. And that reminds me to go back then to talk again about the interview protocol. And so the interview guide could be, is depends on how, so it depends on the experience of the interviewer and how precise you want to be, right? And so some interview protocols, so not all interviews have this sort of protocol, the one you see in the picture, but ultimately, if you want to be systematic about it, you can link what are like the foci or focus points you have in your research with the specific questions you're going to ask about it, right? So this is taking from research on mathematics education, or specifically mathematics in like in terms of like public education schools, especially for teachers. Um, and so if you're interviewing math teachers, right, the authors had like three main issues, and then they're divided into subfields. So what's the nature of mathematics as understood by teachers? What do they believe about teaching mathematics? And then how students learn mathematics. And so here, like definition of mathematics based on your belief, what is mathematics, right? And then here, for example, development of mathematics science, elaborating your belief on the development of mathematics science. So you can, the questions have to be based on some subfields you want to explore. And this is just a simple example because typically within each subfield you see right here or subfocus, you'll have a list of questions, not only one, right? And they could be like alternative or like alternating questions. So you have three questions all asking the same things, but in different ways. So based on like the reaction you see from the interviewee, if you feel like, you know, when you talk to someone, you get a sense of how you want to approach something with them. So you have three different versions of the question, and then you just decide which one would sound better to the interviewer, or which one would basically invites a better reaction. And so this type of interview protocols help you with that. And so that's about conducting interviews. Then about transcribing, which honestly we're not going to spend a lot of time on. But transcribing, it's really critical when you read an interview or an interview transcript, or if you read a research based off interviews, to learn how exactly they've converted the audio into print, or like either digital or print. And typically, so back in the old days, you would have a little recorder and then a literal transcriber. So you would just by hand or by typewriter type whatever you hear on the audio. And I think I don't need to explain how tedious that could be, especially if you're listening to like 9 hour, 10 hour, 12 hours of interviewing. Hopefully we live, thankfully, sorry, we live in the year 2021. So there are many advancements in hardware and software that could help us with transcribing. Just for your own reference, you're not asked to use this for class. There are some paid services on the web that could actually use artificial intelligence to transcribe audio files. And they're not that pricey. So this is only one website, Temi.com. So the transcription price is like a quarter per minute, right? So if you have a 1 hour, basically you would pay $25 for transcribing it into a file, into a document file. So they would transcribe it to you, and it will you will be able to download it as a Word doc, and you can edit it as well. So this one would get you around, because you know what AI is, or artificial intelligence? I think I explained this before, right? Yeah. So artificial intelligence is a machine will actually do the transcribing, not a human being. So a machine with voice recognition, similar to the one you use on your like cell phones, smartphone, like Siri or Alexa, those type of things. If you want a human transcriber, the prices range from like 80 cents per minute to $1 per minute. And so that would be a human transcriber. So if you have 10 hours of audio, you'll pay around like maybe 80, right? If it's 80 cents, so you pay $80. Again, it's not really, if you think of it, not that expensive, right? Considering that if you pay someone to do it by hand, you pay much lower than that. So yeah, and then there are some who would also do editing, right? What would be a problem if you're transcribing an audio? What would be some of the problem that you would face? Can you think of any problems? I'm trying to ask why it would be difficult, though. I asked two of you to transcribe my lecture, let's say. What might be some of like the difficult things you would encounter?
The transcription between two different people or two people might be different from one another. So like the way that we interpret what you're saying can be like completely opposite of one another.
Yeah, thank you. So character recognition, right? Especially if you transcribe interviews. So is it, or like a lecture? So am I now talking, or is it Ray? If you're transcribing just the audio, right? So you don't have a video. So you might like encounter that problem, especially if people like tones or like pitches are very close. What else? So you have that. What else related to audio and technology?
Yeah, I was gonna say people speak faster than they can type.
Mhm.
Like I think the average like word per minute is, or like speaking, the average like a word per minute that we can like internalize and process is like 300 or something. I,
Mhm.
I I'm not too sure, but many people can't even type like 100 words per minute. So
Mhm. 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 Yeah, yeah. So you're hearing something and you want to then like catch it, like, and then you have to rewind, and then you might not catch it, and then you rewind again, and then you forward. So it would be yeah, pretty hard one. In terms of like also speaking of people, what would be, let's say you're interviewing people from different backgrounds and you have like audio recordings of them. What would be a problem of transcribing? Let's look at the chat. Yeah. So you Lisa, yeah. So unaudible speech, right, related to technology. That's one. Background noise. So dogs barking. I don't know. Things moving in the room, or just like the white noise. So yeah, the noise. But what would be also related to people voices though? What would be people's speech? What would be a difficulty in transcribing? Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So thank you, Lisa. So accents also. If you're interviewing people from different backgrounds, you might go to New Zealand and interview people from New Zealand, or like hear people from New Zealand. So without a video, so if you're only listening to the audio recorder, actually, because the movement of the mouth and face in general help you recognize speech. Audio is more difficult because you're losing the cues and you cannot figure out what they're saying sometimes, right? So unless you're trained, or like so you're from that background, or you're trained to hear those different accents, yeah, you would actually miss transcribe or like miss totally some of the words being heard, right? So yeah, those. So that's why I'm saying like it's worth paying for if you want to get better quality uh, for like transcription. Also, there are free tools. So Zoom. So especially the well, it's free if you're having the full corporate version, like the one we use with UST. Actually, all of my lectures are transcribed automatically by AI with a high accuracy rate. Uh, so really, they won't be 100%, but I think it would be like 90-ish, which is fine, considering that no human transcriber is working on it. Microsoft Word had like the dictation feature, as well as Google Docs. And you might try them actually if you're ever gonna use them for any project you might have. Like it's called dictation, and so you would just talk, and then the Word will basically process those. So it's similar to when you're using the dictation for like your smartphone keyboard. Um, and finally, once you have the transcripts, you start to analyze the data. And the thing you're going to use to analyze the data is content analysis. The content analysis is coming back. So whenever you're doing like interviews or focus groups, you're doing content analysis by nature. The thing about interview transcripts or like interview data that they remember there is no one true meaning, right? Because this is more like an interpretive work. Because in interview, either in the interviews or in focus groups, you hear from different individuals, and sometimes uh, you get like opposing viewpoints, people agreeing with one another, even one person like having some contradictory view or contrasting views, which all of us do, right? If you speak for 1 hour, you're like bound to say something that's a little bit of conflict with something you said earlier. And so there's also different emotions during an interview, different like tones like among individuals, different contexts for each interview, right? So if you're someone who's just interpreting the data, right, there's no one true meaning. They're different. There's a range of meaning and feelings and points of views. So ultimately, your role is then as a researcher is to, like as an analyst particularly, is to try to at least just for or combine individual views to present the group view, right? So similar to the example I gave last week. So your physical activities during COVID or pandemic time, different people would have developed different routines and would express different feelings. But what's the commonality among all of you or among all of the research participants? Right? What like the four major issues, let's say, that all of you have raised? What different approaches do you have to those four issues? So like, let's say, I don't know, isolation, time management, stress management, and maybe then finding space, right? I just made them up. And so how, let's say those are four major topics, then what themes of what, similar to content analysis, we say categories, right? What themes could summarize what all of you have said, right? So the point of analysis is to not to present the transcript as is. You actually have to analyze and then give the reader the distilled version of those interviews. Like what are like the five major takeaways, 5, 6, 7 major takeaways that you took from it. Right? And so we sort of explained this before during content analysis, but it's good to refresh. In content analysis, you could do, for interview transcript, you can do open coding, which is unrestricted, as you all practiced, right? So you would use multiple tags for each answer, right? So identify small units or codes, right, for each one. You would then start to look at those tags and see what initial codes you could come up with, right? So what big chunk or categories that could combine different codes or tags that emerged from reading the transcripts. And finally, you can then sort them out into like big themes, like to manageable numbers, like 4, 5, 6. So it's again similar to the content analysis exercise you've done. And also similarly, those themes could be based off a theoretical framework you have, right? So we gave examples before about like by the image, for instance, or about like research on, if you're doing research on depression or you're doing research on motivation, what are the main motivators for exercise? You can look into the literature and then say, okay, I'm going to analyze the interviews I do about exercise motivation along the themes that previous research have examined, right? Or you can do similar to what many of you did with the donut exercise, if you remember, which is let me look at the data and inductively try to come up with themes that summarize what I've read. So the data have produced, or your reading of the data, that's very critical. Your reading of the data produced those four major themes that you think could accommodate for the body of transcript that you have, right? And so here, like, go over the steps again very quickly, because again, it's similar. We've done analysis before. The issue is, however, when you read transcript, the meanings are not going to be super clear the same way you're reading an article, a book chapter, or even tweets. Let me ask you why, and try to think deeply about this. Why would interpreting an interview transcript be harder than interpreting an article made for print? what would be the major difference or major differences between the two? Yes. Let me ask you in a different way. What would be a different, let's say, think of yourself or your professor or something. What would be the difference between the way you write and the way you talk? What would be the major difference?
I would say the details that go towards like actually writing something down, um, like for instance, for myself, like my thoughts don't usually come out the way that I want to say them. But if I were to like think about it by writing it down, like, and you were to read that, like you would understand a little bit better.
Yeah, so it's exactly, so it's not only you, right? Everyone, right? So we are able to write down our thoughts better than the way we express them, especially if it's like incorrect. So first of all, like, so you have a transcript. So what if you listen to what Ray was just saying? He said many times like and like and he knows, and we all do that. And so if you're expressing your idea or like someone you're trying to interpret what they're saying, you look at a transcript and it's full of those and you knows, and also they're not giving full thoughts with full sentences because that's not the way we speak unless you're giving like a professional talk, right? We say half a sentence and then we pause and we say and then we switch to another topic and then we come back to the old topic. And so what I'm trying to say is natural speech is messy. And so keeping aside the hardship of transcribing it, even if you're handed the transcript, just interpreting it, it's more messy than when you're interpreting a tweet, because a tweet is based on someone that thought about it, sometimes even strategized about it, and yeah, it has a like a beginning, a middle, and an end. But speech, human speech, is much messier, and so that requires that you would read the data multiple times. You would read, like, try to read the full context. You read like the answer that preceded the paragraph you're analyzing and the answers that comes after it. You would as different persons. If your research is collaborating, you might go back to the person who interviewed that. Even if you were in the interviewer, you might forget like the context. So you might go back, hopefully if there's a video record or like an audio record, just to remember exactly what was the occasion or the context in which that answer was given, right? And so, yeah, the difference is the process for interpreting transcript data could be more, it's iterative, it's more cyclical, like if you go, like has multiple rounds, more than when you're analyzing, let's say, a written or like a text made for initially for publishing or for publication or print, right? Like, so the difference between speech and writing. Um, so once you go through identifying themes, so you're just trying here, like initially coming up with initial codes, as we said. You will then try to create some more manageable codes, like, and the guide for it is that based on your research questions, what themes would then emerge, right? So you're analyzing, remember, you're conducting interview or researchers conducting you to answer some research question they have in mind. So ultimately your analysis should be geared towards answering those research questions. So for example, if you're doing research about physical activities, the themes you're going to generate from the interviews will be about like the motives for physical activities. What practices do people have when they do physical activities? So either like sport or going out or hiking or you name it, right? Relations that are built around physical activities. So if you go like, I don't know, to a yoga group or like a club or like to the gym, or you have an exercise group that's done in someone's basement, those type of things, like the human relations aspect of exercise. And then outcomes. What did people like feel that physical activities do for them, or like how is it important for them in terms of like functioning on a daily basis? So those five major focuses or like fields would guide the way you would analyze the data. So so you would hear whatever, let's say, Jared is saying or Jay is saying, and they'll try to sort it into, okay, which one of these five things are they talking about? So I'm trying to say the codes need to come at least mostly or somewhat from the research questions. And then the subfields, obviously, there are things that you would only hear once you conduct the interviews, right? But at least you have to have some basis for which codes you're going to generate, okay? So yeah, once you come up with those initial themes, you would see, remember what we said about coding categories? So they have to be, and actually that was in the midterm, they have to be, we said mutually exclusive, and we said they had to be what also? Mutually exclusive and
Exhaustive.
yes, thank you, Tommy. Yeah. So in other words, exhaustive means they account for the data you have. So you could come up, for instance, if you're transcribing an interview, interpreting an interview transcript, yeah, you can come up with five themes, but then there are some answers and some chunks of the interview that don't fit into any of your themes. So that means those themes are not supported. So the themes have to account for the like the vast majority of the units that exist in your data, right? Uh, in interviews, I have to say, you have to think back when we said you think about the units of analysis. So you don't have to do like line by line or sentence by sentence. Because again, people say a lot of nonsense when they talk for like some incomplete thoughts, so they cannot be coded anyways. But at least you look at a chunk, let's say a full thought or like a paragraph in your transcript, and then you try to assign it to one of the themes, right? So yeah, so also they have to be, the themes have to be like mutually exclusive and exhaustive. That makes sense. And then, yeah, and finally, and this is again, similar to like validation, once you have them, you do a final round to see if they fit again. So the themes are to actually reflect the subject responses, so they are valid, right? There's a match between what you say are like the major themes of the interview and then the interview transcripts. So you could provide, for example, some quotes that support themes, right? And accommodate for the vast majority of views expressed, like what we said, so generalizability. So those themes could be applied to a large chunks of what we heard in the interviews. And for that, at the final stage, like some themes could be revised, they could be merged into one another, they could be combined, they could be separated, could be combined. Um, like there are different ways to do it. So again, we follow, they need to accommodate the vast majority of text, and also they have to be distinguishable or like have mutual exclusivity, as we said before. So some example of when we say the themes could be narrowed down or broadened. And so we're talking about the daily routine during the pandemic, right? Or like how are young people coping with the pandemic? So let's say you had the theme of loneliness. Depending on the data you have, so it depends on the response. Loneliness could be like too large or too small, right? So loneliness by itself couldn't, if it didn't come up that much, you can then combine it into like the themes of like social isolation. So yeah, like you can have loneliness, lack of connection, this type of things, all labeled as social isolation, and that will be one theme. However, if you find like majority of people, like if the topic is about different types of social isolation, let's say, then loneliness could be broken down in like separate things. So you can talk about like romantic loneliness, right? People not being able to date or go out with their romantic partner due to the restrictions. And then maybe family, like loneliness related to family or work-related loneliness or professional loneliness, different type of loneliness. And so those would be different themes, right? And so, yeah, again, it's guided by your research questions. If my topic is about loneliness, I cannot have one theme as loneliness because everything we're going to talk about is about loneliness, right? So I have to divide it, okay? Whereas if it just came up casually in one interview, it has to be fit within whatever category emerged from my interview. Does this part make sense, or
Yeah, I have a quick question.
sure?
So when you're making like themes or you're coding for your data that you find, I feel like a lot of the times, especially with like text or with transcribing like interviews, you will like run into a lot of issues of mutual like mutually exclusive data, or not mutually exclusive data. So like how would you code for like interview data? Would you use like set like certain words that like make a theme, like for loneliness, like words like I don't know, like sad or something, like go into like the theme of like self-isolation, or like how would you code for the data?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, so the things about interviews, as I said, is remember I said content analysis. You have to pick what's going to be your units of analysis. It's going to be a word, a sentence, a paragraph, a page, etc. In interviews, you're right. You cannot code for words because ultimately you run into it would be so hard then to come up with mutually exclusive categories because, or even for sentences, because in one sentence, I can talk about two different things, right? I can talk about like isolation and let's say financial hardship, okay? Or I can talk about physical activity or romantic loneliness and also technological difficulty, right? So this happens like within 2 lines, you can have two things. So in interviews, that's why you would use, and you're going to see that in the homework, by the way, they would use like thematic analysis. So you come up with different themes, generally speaking, that emerged from like the full body of the interview, okay? But then you don't have to assign like specific sentences to each one. You would say, okay, this paragraph, generally speaking, fits into that. This paragraph, generally speaking, fits into this. So the definitions of your themes themselves, the themes themselves could be separated. conceptually or like by definition. But yeah, sometimes specific words or specific phrases would make it hard to decide which way the sentence, which one, or which cat, or like which theme the sentence should belong to. But that's fine. As long as you were able to generate themes that accurately reflect to the reader what the interviewee was saying. Like summarize, like I conduct an interview with you, I come up with 4 themes, and okay, these are the 4 things Jared complained about, regardless of which sentence in your answers belong to whatever themes. Did that make sense? Did that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so so based on all of that, so what you do when you are reading an article that uses an interviewing approach or interviewing method, whether it's with based on focus groups or in in-depth interviews. So here are the questions that you should ask yourself when you're reading, like to see how, like if the quality, if the article you're reading followed some like quality criteria for interview. So some critical questions are like, what was the number of the interviews, and were they enough? Look if the authors conducted 3 interviews, 5 interviews, 8 interviews, 12, 20, 50 people. And that's more about like the general, external generalizability, right? Like how representative are those views of like the population being studied? And again, you're not going to get like super high generalizability with interviewing due to the limitations. We said before, logistic limitations of how many people you could recruit an interview, but at least you have to have some substantial number, right? Especially the larger the population is, the more interview you would need to conduct. Was there an interview guide or interview protocol, and how is that? How is it developed? So the interviewer mentions how they came up with the question, what guides did they use? Did they base their interview questions on a separate, like in a past research? They conduct research enough to generate those questions. So how were the questions generated and organized? And then the transcription. So was it done manually or by machine? Both. So that's more about like the accuracy of representing the data. Then how many people coded the transcripts? So we had 1 analyst, 2 analysts looked at the data, 3, 4. Was it like the researcher themselves? Did they train some of their students to do it for them? Like how did the coding procedure went about? And then how were the coding themes developed? So was it totally based on like an inductive approach? So the coders just read the transcript and came up with 5 themes based on their interaction with the data, or was there like a theoretical framework in from whatever subfield the researcher specializes in, and so that guided how they coded the data. So that's also a major question. And then back to the idea of exhaustiveness and validity, like were the categories sufficient to reliably reflect the data? Like, do you see that, for example, the themes the researchers presenting to you, do they make sense? Are they clear? When they give you like citations or quotes from the interviewees, do they fit with the themes that the authors claim emerge from the data? So that's also a major question, like about the accuracy or validity of the research. And then did the analysis account for other possible interpretations? Because again, if, as I said, if me and Eric are interpreting some data, but then Jared and Grant are also working with the same data, they might come up with slightly different interpretation that we did, right? So could then the author say, well, probably they're like these were different point of views that might have interpreted the data better, right? And then was the analysis thoroughly presented? Right. So does the authors just say, you know, we interviewed 5 people and here are like 5 themes that emerged, but they haven't explained like what the themes mean, what like support the validity of those themes, like specific citations. So do they, for example, so more particularly, do they just let you take their word for it? So this is what we heard in the interviews, and that's it? Or do they explain or like give more validation and details of what each themes mean and how they've arrived into it through the repeated process of interpretation? And so those are like the things you should look for when you're conducting, when you're reading an interview article. So there is an activity for you for the discussion board. And so I'm going to ask you, so for this week, go back to the first discussion post you have and re-examine the research idea you've suggested. And then try to come up with like an idea of how you're going to conduct an interview about this topic. Okay, so how could you or someone use an interview approach, either a focus group or in-depth interviews, to conduct a similar research, right? Like explain what the idea is and why are you choosing focus groups or in-depth interviews briefly. So again, here, you're not being asked to give like a full research project idea, just a general idea, right? So you're not expected to give me like a protocol of questions or list of questions or stuff. You might like, so you just present like the major research question or questions and how this, and how, why the use of focus groups or interviews going to be useful. Okay. And some of you have made comments about your research idea you posted that they were not related enough to communication. So if I made that comment, yeah, please contact me to see, like, we could discuss like what a different topic idea you might suggest. But yeah, so this would be for, do you have any questions about this part?
So is this going to count as towards one of our exercises or just separate from the?
No, this is separate. This is separate.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just this is just like for participation thing. Yeah. So and it's again based off the very first post, the very first discussion post that we've had, right? About like a discuss about the research. Remember when you said like a research article that you found, right? So try to come up with a research idea similar. So yeah, anytime throughout this week, from now to Sunday, would be fine, right? But don't spend too much time on it, okay? Just the research idea, and in general, like, why do you think it's useful to use an interview method for it? And finally, we do have also an individual exercise to this week, so by the end of this week. And so it's similar to the previous exercise that we've done. So exercise 1, but it's more detailed. So you have to choose one article. So I have a list of 4 articles. You have to choose one. And then I have specific questions about the method of recruiting participant, the content analysis process, and a presentation of results. So for this part, you're going to read like the introduction, the method, and the results section. So this would be like a full examination of the article. I'll be asking specific questions. To answer those to the best of your ability, pay attention to the things we've been discussing in this class, right? Like especially today about the thematic analysis, about the sufficiency of the themes. And so this way, yeah, so this would be individual assignment number 3. And it would be worth 15 points. So there are more points for this one than the previous 2. I'm happy to answer questions about throughout the week. So you could email me, contact me via GroupMe, like talk to me during office hours, and yeah, if you have some specific questions. But yeah, if you answer the questions directly, I think my questions are pretty much straightforward. So if you answer them, that will be enough for the exercise. Any questions about that? Yeah, so this would be due by the end of this week. All right, so if you don't have a question, then yeah, that's it for interviewing. And so on Wednesday, we're going to talk about ethnographies. So until then, see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor, I had a last minute question for you.
Sure.
That discussion board, do you want us just to repost it in the old discussion?
No, I'll create a new thread.
Okay,
Question.
perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And then you like you said, you want this due by Friday, or you want everything due by Sunday?
Sunday would be fine. No problem.
Okay, for both the discussion board and the exercise. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.